Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. On this podcast, I dive deep into the journeys of trailblazing South Asians, sharing the stories of the leaders and dreamers lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Hello, everyone. Today, I am so thrilled to welcome Dhanusha Sivajee to Trailblazers. Dhanusha is the Chief Marketing Officer at Angie, previously known as Angie's List, an online resource for finding local providers for various services you need for your home. Prior to Angie, Dhanusha served as Chief Marketing Officer at The Knot, a platform that provides content and services to couples planning weddings and starting their lives together. She also previously served as CMO at the AOL Brand Group prior to its acquisition by Verizon. She got her start in the space at Bloomberg and at HBO after pursuing her MBA at Duke. And while at HBO, she was part of the marketing efforts that launched HBO On Demand and HBO Go. Dhanusha is originally from England, which is a first for Trailblazers, and she grew up immersed in the world of small businesses run by her Sri Lankan immigrant parents. I'm sure that's a story that resonates with so many of us, and it's part of why I'm so excited to chat with you today, Dhanusha. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, as I mentioned, when I first came across you and your story, the first thing in particular that resonated was you grew up in England to Sri Lankan immigrant parents, and I'm not from England, but they had a knack for running these small businesses, these corner stores, dry cleaners, gas stations, and in some ways, it's true to the South Asian stereotype, but I had a very similar upbringing. For my parents and my family, they were immersed in small businesses through the hotel hospitality industry. And I've found that being immersed in that world tends to have an impact on our career pursuits very early in life. So I'm curious to hear, how did this aspect of your upbringing impact you in those early days?
Yeah, it's funny. It's only thinking about it now that you see the impact that it had, right? At the time, you're not so going like, oh, here's why I'm doing it. But that said, as you mentioned, I spent most evenings and weekends begrudgingly at the time working for my parents, right, at their various businesses. And like you said, they came to England from Sri Lanka fleeing a civil war. So they really had no choice in terms of they had to put food on the table. They didn't have any formal education to speak of. So this was really their only option. Thankfully, there was a large Asian and Sri Lankan community that was there to support them. But as you said, I think for me, it kind of made me who I am in many ways. I've obviously done a lot working across all of what you would sort of think of as typical business functions, marketing, accounting, sales, right? I was usually working the cash register, trying to drive the sales and asking people if they wanted the chocolate bar with the gas or without really realizing, right? You just pick up those skills. And so for me, when I went to university and was deciding in England, you actually pick a subject from day one.
Wow.
And so when I looked at everything, I was like, whoa, like there's a career in business. I can have sort of a corporate career doing what I've been doing for my parents for the last 10 years. Like, sign me up. It really did stand me in good stead because I think a lot of times when you go to college, there's that desire to have the internships that build out and round out your academic career. But for me, I felt that I was sort of like, oh, that's a thing. Yes. There were like terminology being put around things that I had been doing for the last decade with my parents. So
yeah, it's so funny. The minute you said someone's buying gas and you're trying to sell them a chocolate bar, the term for that is cross-selling.
Exactly.
And that's not something I knew until I got a formal education in it. But those little tidbits start to work their way into your knowledge base. And then, like you said, it's given a formal name.
Exactly. We had the practical experience before we were getting the academic terminology, right? But for me, it all just, like you said, it was like integrated marketing 101. It was like making sure your message across all channels. I was like, oh, yeah, that's what I was doing with the signage and the flyers I was putting out for the laundromat. So for me, it was just a very natural extension. And while I said I did it begrudgingly, I now really am thankful for those experiences because I just think early on, I just was, that work ethic and grit and sales experience, quite frankly, frontline sales experience that I had growing up has truly, I think, made me who I am today and helped me have that edge.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like in a lot of ways, it all came down to marketing. I mean, you got experiences in these various functions, but that's the route you ultimately chose to pursue. Why? Why marketing?
Obviously every functional leader believes their function is the driver of the business. So I believe that marketing encompasses the whole business. from the perspective of knowing who the customer is, giving them the positioning. But ultimately, I think it came down to purpose. I'm a very purpose driven marketer, and I think marketing's goal is to really define that as a brand. What do you stand for? Not just what you stand for all of a sudden because someone told you you should.
Hmm.
At your core from day one, what is your business stood for? It should stand for something. I always believe if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything.
Yep.
And then I think it's the marketing levers that you have that can really bring that purpose to life. So in the case of Angie, we believe home is the greatest place on earth.
Yep.
And I really want to be able to help people love where they live. And so for me, marketing really just allows me to have the impact that I think we all want and seek in our daily lives and in our jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think marketing as a function has come to become a lot more valued in recent years, especially with the rise of social media and just the added complexity and the fact that you need a dedicated person to understand all these different facets. But I remember growing up, even my business teachers in high school would say and paint marketing as a bit of a showy job, not a lot of substance, you're a bit dispensable. I mean, did you ever feel that way? Did your parents support you pursuing this particular route in business?
Oh, that's interesting. My parents definitely, I think they still don't know what I do. When I was at the Nod, I think they thought I was actually like the wedding planner. And it was like, no, I'm not actually planning the weddings and platform. So now I'm sure they think I'm going to people's houses and doing the plumbing and the electronics. It's fine. But from the outside, I would say probably 20 years ago, even a decade ago, marketing wasn't maybe not taken as seriously as like the finance disciplines, et cetera. But now I think
Yep,
it's a whole different ball game. The
absolutely.
rigor and the data that we as marketers need to bring to the table. And I think from day one we have, but maybe that wasn't always seen. There's no investment that we're making if we're not showing the ROI, whether it's social media, whether it's sponsorships, and I believe that, right? It's like, if we're going
Absolutely.
to, make that investment, I want to know what the return is. And so certainly as we move to more tech-based industries and, just as a nation and as a world, I guess, marketing plays such a large role because it's the product. If you think about the
Yep.
4 Ps, it's a product that you're selling. And in tech and digital, like the marketing is the product, right? That's what you're selling.
Yeah.
So I found my role in the last decade really, and certainly over the last 5 years, has been much more in lockstep with our product and tech teams. They're looking
Interesting.
to marketing to really understand the value props. What are they building for? And then we're really there to be joined at the hip with them to make sure that customer experience delivers on the brand proposition. So not only is it all the tactics that we're using and the channels and making sure that they actually are returning for us and there's a real ROI there, but there's also a what are we building? A
Yep.
lot of revenue for tech companies is product driven. And as marketers, I own that revenue just as much as a product lead does.
And I think that's a really interesting way of framing it because it's not, I think, what people instinctively think, but I think you're absolutely right, especially, like I said, with the rise of all these different channels and the fact that marketing just seems to have become a lot more cross functional in recent years.
Right. It connects the dots on a lot of different functions around the company ultimately. And when we think about our brand, we think about all of our stakeholders, not just in this case, our homeowners, but we think about our pros
Yep.
who are on our platform trying to connect. And we think about our talent,
Yeah.
right? Talent wants to work for brands that are having an impact. So it's
Yeah.
really important that I think the role of the marketing team in any company is to really set the mission and purpose and make sure that everything we do ladders up to that. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the things that drives the revenue.
Absolutely. So I want to fast forward a bit, and I guess actually it's more like trekking backwards. You studied in England, you get your MBA at Duke, and then you land at HBO for 6 years. How did that set the foundation for your career?
I mean, it was huge. It set the tone in so many ways. There were a lot of strong female and diverse female leadership at HBO. And I think for me, I was lucky in that from day one, I had people reaching back and really helping me grow my career. And so for me, that's just something that's really important today that I'm like, just being humble and just making sure that we're helping as many people as we can pursue their dreams, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
At HBO, as we said, it was sort of taking a brand that was really well known from its programming and now taking that to platforms, what seems, I'm going to age myself, right? But there was a time, believe it or not, where you couldn't watch what you want anytime, anywhere. Now that just sort of
Yeah.
seems a given. But when we were launching things like HBO On Demand and HBO Go, and even thinking about cord cutting then, it was seen as such a like, is that ever going to happen? So I've
Wow.
always typically played more of the entrepreneurial role within the large companies. Originally, it was called HBO on Broadband, which I know sounds really crazy now, but that was its first name. It's now had, I think, 10
Wow.
incarnations since then. I think I was just really lucky to always be on the cusp of technology and how that was changing media or changing brands. I think my entrepreneurial spirit, even when I've been in larger corporations, has always been a value to me because I can sort of help work on things that are the future that maybe sometimes people are like, but that's not how we're making money today. It's like, yeah, but that's going to have how we make money a decade from now.
Yeah. I find that super interesting because there's one element of getting, even internally, members of the team to buy into this product that probably seemed a bit outrageous at the time.
Right. Who's going to not pay a cable company, right? Who's not going to pay
Yeah.
the company for HBO?
Yeah. And then you're taking a step further by actually figuring out how do we go out and market this to customers? What is sort of the line of thinking in terms of a product that is so new and just something that people generally aren't familiar with?
I also would say it's looking around the curve, right? Being able to see around bends. And I think everyone knows that it's coming, but it's the types of people that I think are attracted to those roles are the ones who like operating in a little bit more of the gray, right? So I think you need to sort of know yourself. And there are some folks who are like, how do we make money today? How do we deliver? How do we extract as much value in this time frame? For me, I've always thrived in a little bit of I don't want to be doing the same thing every day. I want to be thinking about things in different ways.
Yep.
That's partly what attracted me to Angie. The home services market, $500 billion is the one that
Wow.
still has not really truly been disrupted by technology. You're
Absolutely.
still like asking friends to get the work done and then to get, it's just so
Yeah.
cumbersome and complex. So imagine a world where you could just push a button and your plumbing issue gets fixed. So I think it comes from just knowing yourself and what you're attracted to in a role and what you need in your day to day. And I think for me, a little bit, dare I say it, a bit of chaos coming from my Sri Lankan culture. There was always so much going on that you kind of had to be like, all right, I've got people that are living with us for the next 3 months because they've come over from Sri Lanka and nowhere to go. There
Yep.
was always so much going on in the
Wow.
house that I think for me, that probably allowed me to be able to like think straight, even when there was a lot of chaos, right? And focus. And so
Yeah.
I guess I apply that to when you're thinking about new areas of business, new technologies, even though it's a similar thought process on you take out the noise. The noise now is the what's happening every day and really focus on where you think the industry is going to go.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because whenever I talk to people about their identity on this podcast, I mean, I think that's such a beautiful analogy you just drew of like the culturally, the elements and how that translates to how you view business environments. Super interesting.
These things are only clicking for me now, by the way, in my 40s.
It's all retrospect.
Yeah, it all comes back. You're like, oh, that's probably why I can do that.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was talking to my mom, who again, I don't know if she knows what I do at this point, but I've talked more about her recently as I think about my career because I've had that perspective, which I think she's like embarrassed about. Oh, she's like, I can't share this now with anyone because you're talking about me. And I'm like, and what's the big deal? I can talk about you. I'm like, you've been a role model, but I don't think she sees herself in that way.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if I really saw it in this way like 20 years ago, but now it's sort of become so much clearer for me.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think it's a really, really special thing. And part of why I do this podcast in the first place. I want to come to Angie because I think it's a little bit different than some of the other companies you worked with. And that's why I want to spend a second on that is the motif I sort of noticed in your career is that you've spent a lot of time in marketing within the media and entertainment space. It starts with HBO, then you go to Bloomberg, and then you're at AOL. Was that intentional? I mean, it's no secret that traditional media companies have struggled over the last decade, but what drew you to this space in particular?
Yeah, I think over the last, I guess now 10 years, I've been more in the tech space, right? The Knot was a two-sided marketplace. Angie is also a marketplace now where we're helping pros and homeowners connect. I don't know if it was as an intentional as it probably should have been, but I think it was looking back the right thing to do. People sort of ask me, well, could you go back to media now? And I think I could if it was a disruptive role. But what I love about the tech space is that we are using technology like directly. And like I said, even at HBO, while I was in media, I was in that, like, how are we using technology to disrupt?
Yeah.
I don't like to use buzzwords, but I guess probably looking back, like to play that disruptor role. And I think doing that in technology is certainly easy. And I think at Angie, as I just said, I mean, there's a huge opportunity to disrupt and have impact that helps both homeowners, pros, and an opportunity to capture a lot of addressable market here. As I said, it's a $600 billion market that is largely still offline. So
Yeah.
that's what really attracted me to the role. I'm like, oh my God, there's a problem to solve. I think that's why I really enjoy working for tech companies, because you can really focus on the consumer problem
Yeah.
and then look to technology to solve it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I find it super interesting and personally draw from that a ton because I spent time at a media startup and it wasn't tech oriented. It was more sort of rethinking the way journalism is done. But I felt this craving for more of a move fast, break things environment, which I think you can only get out of some of these tech disruptors. So that resonates a ton.
Yeah, I mean, I do think to their credit, I think a lot of media companies are realizing that they have to do that and they're creating
Yeah.
and incubating teams within. But it's hard, right? Because you've
Yeah.
got your steady stream business and then but that is, I think, true of all companies, that you kind of have to be in the moment and optimize and make sure you're hitting your numbers day to day, but also be thinking ahead as to, it's either you've got to disrupt or you will be disrupted.
So speaking of disruption, you were at the AOL Brand Group, and I shockingly remember AOL. It was the first email I ever had. I had AIM. And it's also the first place you served as chief marketing officer, which is no small feat. What did that transition look like for you stepping into this role? And then I want to get to the part of AOL being acquired and your time stepping away from that role.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, AOL is AOL plus a whole host of brands. And so under my purview, we had things like TechCrunch, Engadget. So we had like the full spectrum of
Yeah.
brands. There was a lot of female focused brands as well, such as Makers, which was pretty cool. To your point, it was my first executive level role. And I think for me, just a real growing experience where the skills that get you to a certain level, you realize are not the same skills that are going to get you to that next level. I think there have been several books written on that. I'm not going to remember now. But it's sort of what got you here won't get you there.
Yep.
And so I think for me, it's really over the last 5, 10 years, it's been thinking about my leadership development in terms of, okay, what are the skill sets that have got us to a certain place? And now what is it going to take to continue to essentially lead and be at the helm of large companies and manage them through that disruption is something that I've really enjoyed focusing on my development there, right? And getting the feedback.
Yeah. What surprised you about stepping into that senior executive role?
I think all senior roles, they probably don't surprise me as much anymore, but I think it is that even when you're a functional leader, your role becomes much less about actually carrying out the function or managing the function. It really is. I always tell people the further up you move, it's about your ability to influence and connect dots across an organization,
Yep.
regardless of what functional. So I happen to be in the CMO seat,
Yeah.
but regardless of what executive seat I'm in, all of our roles are very similar in that we are the folks that are hopefully helping to set strategy with all of our teams, but
Hmm.
then being able to remove the roadblocks so that people can actually execute on those strategies flawlessly. And a lot of times, roadblocks come in the form of cross functional roadblocks. And so your ability to influence and lead is really less of a management, like, am I managing my team? And it's, am I giving people the mission and the purpose and the why behind why they should do it across the organization? So,
Mm.
like I said, maybe less surprising to me now, but I think just when I first stepped into an executive role, it was that you sort of realize you're like, oh, again, it's a different skill set now or a different audience that I'm influencing versus my day to day and being in the weeds of the actual marketing.
Very, very interesting. I mean, you touched on the tactical point of what got me here isn't what's going to get me there. What did get you into this role? I mean, did you just get a phone call one day saying, hey, we want you to be CMO? How exactly did that come about?
Yeah, I think for all of these, look, it is about, I always say to people like focus on the role that you have and your reputation, right? And I always say focus on your hallway reputation because a lot of people sort of feel like, okay, it's like, this is what my manager's telling me. But I think early on in your career, you just want to be aware of just how you're being seen across the organization and by people at all levels. I'd like to think that for all of us, it's where hard work and opportunity meet.
Yep.
I think I've always just been really focused on being able to have an impact and the results, not focused on the FaceTime. It's like, let's deliver on the results. And I think if you do that and you're focused on where you want to go next, it's hard. I'm not saying it was easy,
Yep.
but it is about really if you deliver the results. And I'm really focused on making sure that organizations have that culture in place where it is about not the output of what you're doing or the FaceTime of what you're doing. It's about the actual delivery of the outcomes, not the output. And I think when companies focus on that, then you get to actually see the real talent for what it is, and then the opportunities come from there.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredibly helpful because, like I said, part of what we're trying to do here is provide young South Asians a line of sight into how they get to where you are. And I think understanding sort of the tactical, soft, hard skills of what goes into that is increasingly important because it's not always very transparent for us to figure out how you get there.
Yeah, and it's not I'm not trying to be like, "Oh, it's so easy," right? But I
Yeah, of
really do think
course.
though, like people always say, like, how do you get? And I do think it's luck. But then what is luck? It's why I always say it's where opportunity and hard work meet. So it's like
Yep.
you don't know when the opportunity is going to arise. But I think making sure that going back to the South Asian thing, I'd also say, just surrounded by the community at large every single day, right? Like my husband's always like, oh my God, how many people does your mom have at her house when we go over there, right? I'm like, well, people just stop by. But I think that also just taught me the skill of the interpersonal skills, right? It didn't matter who it was,
Yep.
whatever auntie or uncle or random person was in my house, you have to make conversation. You have to be
Absolutely.
able to keep it moving. And I think it's those softer skills, right outside of our functional skills, that I know serve me very well. I also was quite resilient that I found like a lot of my peers weren't. I was like, oh, well, I've gone through a lot in my childhood. I'm like, this is nothing that like suddenly something hasn't been funded. I'm not going to like have a hissy fit. So I think it
Yeah.
was some of those softer skills that also just helped me along the way, that it's like nothing really bothered me that much. I'm like, all right, we're not going to do that. We'll figure out another way.
Wow.
I felt growing up in my community of South Asians that my mom never really took no for an answer. It was like, all right, fine. Like we can't do this. So we're going to flip to this business. So we can't do this. So we're
Yeah.
going to try another. There just wasn't really room to sort of feel sorry for yourself or feel like everything was terrible.
Yeah.
I don't remember my parents ever sort of going like, oh my God, this is awful. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. It's like, we're going to figure something out.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't even tell you. There's such a shared experience in so much of what you're saying because I feel like it's very reflective of how I grew up in a lot of ways. And to your point on the aunties, I mean, to this day, if my mom has people over, there is no way I can get away with not saying hi and talking to them for at least 10, 15 minutes.
You got to make the
Yeah.
most of it, right? Might as well get something out of it. So I think it's a little bit of, I think attitude is something that can have a big impact. And I know
Yeah.
for me, looking back, just sort of growing up in the community that I did has really just helped the attitude that I bring to work every day. And I'm sure that's true for many people listening.
Absolutely. So you're in this role as CMO at AOL. You left a little over a year into the role, and a couple months after that, I believe AOL was acquired by Verizon. Why the quick pivot? Did you see this potential acquisition coming down the line?
No, that was not the reason. I actually, they always say timing of opportunities. You never know when opportunities are going to come your way.
Yeah.
For me, the not opportunity was just too good to give up, just given the fact that going back to small businesses, here was my first role where it was a two-sided marketplace, where I actually not only could use technology and bring my skills to bear to help people getting married, which I think is just like such a huge purpose, right? Helping people
Yeah.
through all of these life moments. We also own the bump and others. So it was sort of one of those, like, as I said, I'm a very purpose driven marketer and the purpose just really spoke to me. And then on the flip side, it was also helping small business owners that, whether it was caterers, DJs, who wanted to start up their own businesses. And that really resonated with me. So it wasn't a move and that I sort of had the business and strategic savvy to know what was going to happen with AOL. It was more that the not opportunity just really spoke to me. And sometimes you can't choose when those opportunities come at your door,
Yeah.
right? You're like, oh, I would have preferred to have done this for a little bit longer, but I think it's just really important to find that right fit and really be passionate about what you're working on.
Absolutely. I found it fascinating because Korn Ferry a couple years ago released a survey that the average tenure of a CMO is about 3 years. I mean, you obviously have some insight into that. Why is that? What are the factors that you feel play into that, and particularly in your own career transitions?
Yeah, I think I've just been really lucky. I think at age of, I don't remember all the years you probably have in front of you, but I am at the Knot, I was there 7 years. I plan to be at Angie for a long time. I think I'm really lucky that going back to wanting to solve complex problems and really disrupt, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time to really think about what that means, how you leverage the technology, how you message that technology. And like I said, going back to the mission and purpose, if you love what you do every day, there isn't this sense of like, okay, what's the next thing that I want to go to?
Yep, very true.
Especially for me. I'm very lucky. I don't say this statement lightly. When I was like 11 years old, I wasn't like, I want to be a CMO and that just wasn't me. But I
Yeah,
think over the last 10 years, I realized like for me, if I'm going to leave my family and come into work every day, I want it to be with a company and a brand and people that I really love so that it doesn't feel like work. And
yeah.
so for me, then if you found that, you don't want to jump for just anything.
Yeah.
And now, again, maybe it's easy for me to say because I'm at a place where I've been asked, like, do you want to take on CEO roles? And I was like, if I do that, it's going to be for my own business, which I'd like to do one day.
Oh, wow.
So I think right now in corporate America, like CMO is the role that I love playing.
Yeah.
You take CEO role, that sort of brings a lot of other stuff with it that's interesting and
Absolutely.
exciting. But I was like, hey, I can touch that and be a part of that without actually having the CEO role. So I just love the CMO role so much that for me, if I found a company and a brand that I love and I can have the impact, then why leave?
Yeah.
Like it would have to be for something where I think I can have that much more impact and might love that much more.
Yeah. I want to come back to that in a second because, again, there's just so many similarities, I feel like, in the way we grew up, kind of your rise in the corporate ladder and then what your vision is for your future. But a lot of people want to go into work and feel the way you do, right? They want to love their jobs. They want to be excited to wake up every day. And it seems like you've had that experience, at least it sounds like, throughout the various companies that you've worked at. What's the recipe for figuring that out of before you've joined a place being like, this is a place I'm going to be excited about versus, a lot of people go through the motions, especially in the early stages of their career where they're like, I don't like this, but I'm just going to do it because it'll get me to that other thing that I want to do. How have you thought about that?
I'm going to answer that two ways. I would say, because someone else asked me this the other day, I was doing like a fireside chat at the company because I've just started at Angie.
Yeah,
And the one thing I would also say is just, I feel like all of us, no matter where we are, right, and at whatever level, have so much privilege to even be doing the roles that we are doing, right?
absolutely.
Whether it's CMO, whether it's you leading and being able to take this opportunity. And so for me, I think that's just a way that I carry with me. As I said, I went back to Sri Lanka 5 years ago, finally, after the Civil War ended.
Wow.
And it just hit me that my life could have been very different. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's just something I've always known. And that's something that I take with me. But it sort of like was solidified when I went there. My parents just happened to flee that war and get an opportunity to come to England. And so my life went down one track. Right. But
Yeah.
that might not have been the case. And so I'm sort of saying it officially now, but I think just innately, I've always just had that sense of like, whatever I'm doing at whatever level is something that most people would die for. Or quite frankly, there are people out there,
Yeah.
it's like we have such a privilege to be doing what we're doing. Going back to attitude, if we bring that attitude to work every day, it gives you perspective on what you like and what you don't like.
Yep.
And then it suddenly opens up a lot of doors of like, maybe these things aren't really that bad. It's just maybe it's like what I do with them. And
Yeah.
again, I know it sounds really corny, but I actually think that is true. And maybe I just had the additional perspective of like understanding what my life could have been like, and so maybe that just drove me to have that sense of, okay, I have this privilege. I want to make sure that I can have the biggest impact I can have. And I think that's what I would now sort of get into your more tactically answering your question. I
Yeah.
think no matter what the role, right, whatever the title, whatever the function, forget the pay, forget the title, like what impact do I think I can have in this role? If
Yeah.
that sounds like, oh, that seems like something good. Usually, again, it sounds corny, but if you are having that impact, the money and the title and that stuff will come.
Won't matter. Yeah.
It won't matter in that
At
it
the
will actually
outset.
come because you're doing something that you actually think is worthwhile. And you're going to put your effort into it, you're going to have the impact that's going to be seen. And then it's that cyclical effect. Whereas if you're just focused on the job and the title and the money and not really focused on like, what is this opportunity and am I going to be able to have an impact that I want to, then I think that's where people get a little bit stuck.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I honestly really appreciate the point on self-awareness of how lucky we are and what our parents have been through.
Especially as a South Asian community, the opportunities that we have, I probably sound like my mom now, right? But I've turned into the auntie.
Yeah.
But the opportunities that we have, I'm talking to my kids now and I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, I have turned into my mom. But it really is like they've got so much more access and opportunity that I've ever had that I'm not worried about them. I'm like, if they can't figure it out from here, I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah.
It's like there's people out there that just have so much less than we've ever had and they've been able to figure it out, right? So I think we should be able to.
Yeah. I really love that. Right after the pandemic, I quit my first job and I was home for a while. And my sister and mom were getting a little bit on my case, even though I was applying to various jobs. And my dad was very calm. And I asked him one day, I'm like, why aren't you more stressed about this? And he's like, I was your age when I came to this country. I had no idea what I was going to do. He's like, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, it's all going to be okay.
It's all about perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that people shouldn't pursue their ambitions and trying to move up the
Of
ladder, but
course.
I think doing it with a sense of, am I going to enjoy what I'm doing? Right? Life is too short and you spend too much time at work to be obsessing about the title and money every day. You should be obsessing
Yeah.
about like, okay, is this something I enjoy doing and is it having the impact I want it to have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about Angie, which we've been coming to here and there throughout this conversation. It was formerly known as Angie's List, an online resource for finding vetted local service providers for all the various things you need in your home, as you said. Major congratulations, because you were just named CMO in September. Tell me about the job. Tell me what it's been like.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the themes here, I think it's got the two things I look for. It's got an amazing purpose, right? Helping people love where they live, helping pros build hopefully long lasting legacy businesses. And it's got the disruption. What it's been like is exactly that. I think everyone in the building is super passionate about our mission and our purpose. We really believe that this industry is ripe for disruption. It's largely offline right now, and we have launched a lot of services that are really just helping people book their services with a click of a button. It's triple digit growth over the last couple of years in that area of the
Wow.
business. And for me, it's just like, how do I come in and add more fuel to that fire and just keep the growth going?
Yeah.
People love where they live, right? It's their child.
Yeah.
Their home is another
Yes.
child, right? They talk about it that way. And so I just love the idea of, what can we do to build communities around that and really help people love where they live? And then, as I said,
Yeah.
on the pro side, our pros have gone through so much during the pandemic, but they've come
Absolutely.
out even stronger than before. People did invest in their homes during COVID, and
Yep.
so that was great. But it's also just having them be able to get the teams and the access to education that they need to be able to deliver on all the work that's coming in. So there's a lot to do. But as you can tell, I like being busy. I like challenges. And so I
Yeah.
think Angie is just really ripe for growth and success, which is why I'm here.
Yeah. And so, what's your specific goals right now in terms of what you're doing on a day to day basis?
Well, I'm only 6 weeks in. So right now I'm just trying to figure out the
Yeah.
business. But overall, both on the consumer, so the homeowner, and the home service provider, so the pro side, going back to how we started this, what is marketing?
Yep.
It is a full funnel. So my goals are essentially making sure people know who the new Angie is. As we said, we just rebranded to Angie, which was formerly Angie's List. We also had Home Advisor. So it is both that, do people know us? Do they know us for the right things? And then are we acquiring them into our app and as members so that they are loyal users and use us for every aspect of their home, through from
Yeah.
buying their home, getting the inspection, and then maintaining it, upgrading it, dealing with the emergencies. It's that full life cycle on the homeowner side. And so my team is responsible, again, working with a lot of different stakeholders around the company, largely product, to work gold on that full life cycle, making sure we have deep, deep engagement and relationships with our homeowners from start to finish.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the pros. It's not about just sort of helping them with one job. We want to help them for a lifetime. When they start their business, do we help them get set up? We really are almost like a business wingmate for them, if you will, right? We want to help them through the course of their business. And so I think that's what I really love about this role, and what attracted to me is that we are going to build relationships with both sides of that marketplace for life.
Yeah.
So there's always something to be done, right? Just when there's always a, well, did you know about this? We can help you with X. Like, our jobs are never done.
Yeah. Super interesting. I mean, in a world where marketing is so dynamic and it's changing constantly, how do you stay current?
It is by just being surrounded by amazing team members at all levels, right? Above, below, sideways, and just staying curious.
Yeah.
Whatever level you get to, I always try and, I say this to my kids all the time, like, you are never going to be the expert, and
Yeah.
just stay curious and just ask a lot of questions. So I'm usually the one asking all the questions in team meeting. I'm like, well, what's going on over here? Because I think to really stay relevant, you just have to realize that things are changing on a daily basis, that my skill set is not that I know every marketing function really well. Like, my skill set as a leader is I know how to get that out of people where I need to and put it into action.
Yeah.
That is really the skill set that I think we should all be trying to cultivate. It's about just staying current, as you said, like being curious, asking the questions, and then figuring out how you test and learn into whether that could be applicable to your business.
Mm.
So a lot of testing and learning. I'm a big proponent of that.
Yeah. I think that goes without saying for any industry or any role that you're
Exactly.
in. Yeah.
Exactly.
You've had this treasure trove of experiences. What's a particular memory of working on a certain marketing campaign or effort that's really just stayed with you all this time, whether it's at Angie or at HBO?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say probably maybe HBO. I'd give a Bloomberg example too. I think with HBO, as I said, launching HBO on demand and HBO Go, that's one of those things like even today, if I'm watching something, which by the way, it's now changed, right? It's changed names a couple of times with HBO now. I
Yes.
think it's now
HBO
HBO
Max.
Max, right, with the Cinemax component in. But regardless of all that, anytime I'm watching a show on that platform, I still have a sense of pride for the work that the team did to come together and to sort of, even when we were thinking about naming HBO Go and like the process of that, like the
Yeah.
hundreds of names that we had before we picked probably the most obvious one, right? It's always one of those things that you look at a bunch of stuff and then you're like, oh, right, yes, it's just HBO Go. So
Yeah.
I think just given the length of time that it took for that project and sort of all of the different elements across the company, just launching a brand new product and marketing it on a new technology that at the time was not, as I said, like today, like it doesn't seem like anything, right? Like everybody's launching a digital viewing platform of sorts where you can watch anytime anywhere, but back then that was not a thing, and HBO was actually one of the first to do that.
Yeah.
And so that just really sticks with me. And then at Bloomberg, a similar story where obviously Bloomberg is known so well for its terminal and it's such an entrenched business.
Yes.
But the media side of the business that we were creating on mobile, like a TV app and a radio app, was again my first foray into working with product teams and technology and doing the user research around that.
Oh, wow.
And so that always sticks with me, like literally being in rooms and like seeing how people were using apps and what they were tapping on and building, like actually hands on working with product and eng teams to build those products. The Bloomberg Business Week app, which is sort of an award winning app now and still being used by so many people. So I
Yeah.
think those are probably two of the biggest in my sort of early careers.
Yeah. It's funny. I was at Bloomberg offices when I think Amazon bought Whole Foods.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, just imagine like being in that sort of environment real time and seeing people. I'm sure it was very, very exciting.
Yeah, it was the first time that I'd been in an environment where everyone sat outside. It was like they was set up like a trading floor, right?
Yeah.
Like literally everyone literally has like a 3 foot desk. And
Yeah.
so it was a great experience. Initially, I was like, whoa, where do I have my calls? How do I get work done?
Yeah.
But then you realize you're just doing it out in the open. And again, something now that's very commonplace.
Exactly.
I would find it very weird to be sitting in an office by myself at this point.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to touch on something that I found really interesting about all the work you've done. You sit on the board of directors for the Public Policy and Governance Committee for the H&I Corporation, one of the world's largest office furniture manufacturers. And what I love about this is it goes to the conversation about representation of women on boards, the necessary expertise that they bring. And this is so different from anything else you've done. How did this come about?
So it's funny to your point about career. I don't think we should ever stop thinking about what that next thing is for us. And
Yes.
so for me, getting on a board was something that I started thinking about 3 or 4 years ago. My CEO and CFO at the Knot were both sitting on public company boards. And I always remember when they came back from those board meetings, they were just like feeling refreshed. Their like clarity of thought was so much better. I'm like, well, what's
Wow.
going on over here? But I think sitting on a board, what it gives you is perspective because you're not operating in the day to day. That when you go, you're able to actually use your brain and kind of think more strategically, offer the advice to management. But selfishly, what it gets you is that perspective that you can then bring back to your day job. And so I think seeing
Yeah.
that with my CEO and CFO at the Knot, I was like, oh, I think it's something I'd like to do. So I just put feelers out there with some recruiting agencies. And I was like, listen, it's not something that these things don't open up. People serve on boards typically for about 10 years. But I
Yeah.
was like, hey, if something comes up and you think it's a good fit, let me know. It's an interesting time for marketers right now because a lot of these companies are looking for more financial or like CEOs to sit on boards. But as they are having to leverage technology and e commerce as their path forward, a lot of folks are now looking for more product and marketing executives to sit on boards. And so I
Interesting.
just happened to be, again, going back to the what is luck? It's like when opportunity and hard work meet. It was like, okay, I've done everything I
Yep.
can, but you also, it's a little bit of timing. And it just so happens that the timing right now is that a lot of boards are looking for more marketing executive experience. Alongside, they will always need the audit committee, finance, and typical CEO experience as well. So yeah, it's a company that is going through, as I said, I know nothing about furniture manufacturing. I know nothing about supply chain. I was like, why the hell do you want me? But as we said, they were looking for a digital transformation, e commerce, all the things I had sort of done across large media companies over the last decade. So I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And
Yeah.
so sitting on the board, you do see, I learn and grow from my peers each and every day. And I think that's just really important. I think no matter what role you're in and what level, you have to fire yourselves once a month, ask yourself what you don't know, what you're doing wrong, and try and get better, right? Fix it.
Yeah.
You're not fired, but you should fire yourself. And so for me, the board work really helps with that because I'll be sitting in a board and I'll be like, why aren't they doing this, this, and this? And then I'm like, oh, probably should be doing that over here as well, right? Like it just gives you that
Wow.
perspective that sometimes when you're in the weeds of your day to day, it's just really hard to elevate yourself no matter what level you're at. You just get in there and you need to step back and ask why 5 times,
Yep.
which is what you do as a board. That is what you're paid to do,
Yeah.
right? You're obviously there to govern and guide, all of that, but you do it by asking the questions to get to the right answers.
Yeah. I so appreciate you sharing this because a lot of the discourse I feel like has been women need to be on boards. We need this representation. But, as an early career person who might consider this one day, you're never really told why. Like, why is this something we should think deeply about doing? And the fact that it was something you proactively thought about based on what you saw in your surroundings is really fascinating.
That's probably the one proactive thing I've done in my career. Okay, I was like, finally, I'm like, okay, maybe I should manage myself. No, but yes, I think it's something that people should think about as a back pocket. Again, not something that should be like, if it doesn't happen today, that it's a disaster, right? It will, at the right time and right opportunity, these things will open up. And, it doesn't have to be a public company, right? Starting on nonprofits, starting with
Yep.
private companies have a lot more opportunities as well. Sometimes more interesting opportunities, right? You're not stuck sort of doing a lot of the sort of typical audit work and
Yep.
governance work that is necessary with public companies.
Yeah. Super interesting. I want to track back to something you said earlier that caught my attention. You have this vision to be a CEO in your future. Tell me a little bit about that vision.
Oh, interesting. I forgot I put that out there. I think at some point I'd like to create a product or a service that gives back to really going back to what this is about, like to the Sri Lankan community. I think at the end of the day, I'm doing all what I'm doing and I love what I do. But if I really think about like when I'm on my deathbed, what am I going to be most proud of? The funniest thing is I don't know if that's actually happened in my career yet. Don't take from that I'm not proud of everything I've accomplished. I am. I'm proud of the impact that I hopefully have had on other people and that they've had on me. Like I've loved every minute of it. But I do feel ultimately I want to do something that gives back to the Sri Lankan community because it goes back to a little bit of like, I would not be here today. My life could have gone a very different way. And I feel with that privilege, there's something more specific that I'd like to do to give back. So I don't know exactly what that, I have some thoughts and some ideas. Let's talk in about 5 years. But that's probably where I want to be. Like, again, if I'm going to be leading and being the CEO, I think it'll be something along those lines where I'm like specifically giving back to a cause that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, it resonates a ton because I grew up in a very robust South Asian community back in Atlanta and have felt very similarly already. But Dhanusha, thank you so much for joining me on Trailblazers today. This was such a fantastic conversation and being able to get insight into your career and the points and insight behind why you made certain decisions and transitions is just really incredible. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you want to get new episodes straight to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter at southasiantrailblazers.com and follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.